Hello, and welcome to Meet the Author, a program that is brought to you by Quincy Access Television and the Thomas Crane Public Library. During the show, we will highlight authors and their work. Copies of their books are available for checkout at the Thomas Crane Public Library. Also, the library hosts book clubs for all ages, and you can find out more information about them if you visit the library's website, thomascranelibrary.org.
But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard, if you can.
Well, I've been a teacher in Lexington for 44 years.
Okay.
Just retired, although I actually retired 7 or 8 years ago, and then I was teaching one class.
I see. In the public schools?
In the public schools,
Okay.
yeah. And I finished in Lexington High School. But I'm also affiliated with the Lexington Historical Society. I was an archivist, and now I'm a historian for the Lexington Historical Society.
Oh, very good.
So,
So history is in your blood, obviously.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Teaching in Lexington, now for a year living in Quincy, where history is very big also.
Certainly, yeah. Now, is this your first book?
No, it's my sixth book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is it a series or?
No, I've written 4 books about Lexington. I wrote a short history of Lexington, a photo book on Lexington, and a book on analyzing documents in Lexington. And then I wrote edited 2 books just looking at historical documents and how you use them in the schools.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So who was the Patriot Parson?
Well, Jonas Clark
Yeah.
was the minister in Lexington at the time of the Battle of Lexington and Concord.
Okay.
And he was the most important politician in the town. He wasn't technically a politician. As a matter of fact, he never showed up at town meeting because he didn't pay taxes as a minister and had no business there. And it was always seen as something that would be, something that's somewhat unseemly. But he, behind the scenes and from the pulpit, had a lot to do with radicalizing the town. In addition, he, when John Hancock, born in Braintree at the time,
Right.
was and Sam Adams were on the night before the Battle of Lexington and Concord were staying with Jonas Clark
I see.
at his house, and when Paul Revere and William Dawes were dispatched to warn the countryside, but more importantly to warn Hancock and Adams that the British had started a mission moving west towards Concord.
Right.
They thought that they were after Hancock and Adams, and so Paul Revere and Dawes headed straight for the Jonas Clark's house.
Okay. Would be the parsonage, I guess, right?
It's the parsonage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were there, and this is another Lexington connection, because Jonas Clark had married John Hancock's cousin.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Just that day?
No,
Oh,
no.
all right. Okay.
And about 20 years earlier.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So obviously they were
They,
Friends.
and John Hancock's grandfather had been in the parsonage for 50 years previous.
okay. All right. So,
So there's a real Lexington and Quincy
connection that I had not
Yeah.
been aware of before. Was that the reason for writing the book?
No.
Okay.
The reason for writing the book was that Jonas Clark in Lexington is known as very important. Everybody knows about Lexington's history.
Certainly. Yeah.
Believe and that he was the moving force behind its radicalization. We have a middle school named after him, and so on and so forth.
okay.
But I don't believe too many people outside of Lexington pay much attention to him.
No, as I mentioned, I had not heard of him prior. So yeah, I think you're right. So that was the reason to call it.
That was the reason to try to reach a wider audience, have
Okay.
Jonas Clark reach a wider audience.
Okay. How did you go about researching the book?
Well, we have a good deal of documentation, primary sources. We have his what is called Diary Almanac. He wrote 5 volumes of 10 years each, because he was there for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, 2 of the volumes is missing, but we still have 30 years of his time there. The almanac diaries are very, very brief. You only have 1 page for an entire month, so you get a lot of rain today, next page, next entry the next day, ditto.
I see. Okay, all right.
But you do get things that are happening around the town. Hancock here, or
okay.
Adams here. 8 of our people killed in Boston, in reference to the Boston Massacre.
Yes.
So you do get a little bit. We also have some letters. We also have his resolutions and instructions that he wrote.
Okay.
Sort of ghost wrote.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Even then.
Yeah.
Okay. So is the book a story of his life, or is it a story of him during that period in time? What's the timeline?
It's a biography. It's a biography.
Okay.
But the first part of the book takes a look at his different roles as a family man. One chapter is a family man. One chapter is a farmer. One chapter is a minister. But then the second half of the book really focuses on what we call the Revolutionary Era from 1765 until, the end of the war, and then I continue his life.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, because he's still an important political figure in the town until he dies.
I see. Okay. So we don't want to give away the ending of the book, obviously,
Right.
but
He does die. I'm sorry.
people pretty much figured that out, I'm sure. How long did it take to put this project together?
Well, I was working on it for about 7 years or so.
Wow. Okay.
And off and on, because I was teaching, and we'd go on the back burner for a while, and then I'd go back at it.
Sure. Okay. Are there any photos or manuscripts?
Yes, there are quite a few photos.
Oh, there are. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
folks would enjoy that. Thank you so much for stopping by and giving us a little taste.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
Pleasure, and nice to meet you and learn about your story. You are a Quincy resident, recently retired, I understand.
Recently retired. I taught for 39 years and loved it.
Really? Where did you teach?
I taught in Wellesley and Newton, and I taught in Northern Virginia for 17 years.
Public schools?
Public schools.
Wow. So
Loved it.
Did you really?
I did.
Is that what you studied?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I've been writing since I was 9 years old, and when I was 11 years old, I sent a letter to Little Brown in Boston with a little story and said, could you possibly publish this?
Oh, how cute.
And an editor took the time to write a little note back to me and said, if you keep writing, I'm sure one day you'll be published. So that was sweet of her to do that.
And you did. And
I did.
Yeah, and here you are. So is this kind of a lifelong dream of yours?
It really is.
Really?
It really is. And when I was teaching, I
Yeah.
spent an awful lot of time on the lessons, so I didn't really have a lot of time writing, but I studied writing and I read a lot, so I learned as I went along.
What did you read? What were you attracted to?
Oh, I read everything. I've read nonfiction. I've read, I remember reading about Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, who came to New Jersey and lives in New Jersey. And I've read mysteries, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle
Okay.
and Dorothy Sayers and on and on.
Okay.
Just lots of things.
What did you teach? What was your kind of...
I started off teaching literature
Okay.
to middle school, and I also taught high school. And then I ended up teaching reading to kids who were failing, and that was the most rewarding. And I ended up teaching in an alternative school where children had lots of different kinds of problems, and I loved that too.
Okay, but was there always a kind of a story inside you that was, burgeoning to get out? Or is that what this is?
Yes, I wrote a story called Gumpagoo, and I sent it to a publishing company when I was in my 20s. And they did send me a letter back and said, we really like it, but right now we're just publishing realistic stories. And that was one of the first female heroines, way before female heroines came about.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I mean, I'm picturing, do you have a desk full of manuscripts that you've written and never published? Or
I have lots of short stories.
Short stories?
Yes.
Okay.
This is the first novel I've written, and the first novel that I attempted to write. So I
Okay.
did a lot of work on short stories.
Okay, so it's called In Blood and Stone.
It's in Blood and Stone, and the amateur sleuth is a teacher who works in an alternative school and with children who are very troubled, and all of the stories are going to come out of that. It's going to be a series.
Oh, it is, okay.
It's going to be a series.
All right.
And in developing my amateur sleuth, I was wondering, what are amateur sleuths really like? So I investigated Sherlock Holmes, and I investigated Dorothy Sayers' Peter Wimsey, and of course Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple. So I took a look at all those and how did they develop their sleuth, and that's how I ended up developing my sleuth, by learning about theirs.
Oh, all right. So who's the key character? What's
Her name is Zoe Stone.
Okay.
And she has crazy wild hair, and she looks a lot younger than her 33 years. She's very small, and she has a freckled face, and she has a boyfriend, David Roth, who also works in the alternative school. And in this novel, my debut novel, they have broken off their relationship.
Oh.
Yeah.
So there's a little drama too.
A little drama.
Okay.
And Zoe Stone ends up, right at the beginning, first chapter, she ends up being put on administrative leave by a very nasty principal. And then it spins out from there.
Oh, all right. Yeah, we don't give away too much, right?
No.
Okay. How long did this project take, Florence?
It really took 3 years.
Wow. Okay.
I thought I knew more about writing than I really did.
Yeah.
So my editor was very helpful,
Great.
and I'm very pleased with the result. And I did win an award for one of my short stories. It's called the Al Blanchard Award, and it's for professional writers.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
There were over 170 entries, and so I was very pleased.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has that been published?
No, it hasn't been published.
Oh, all right. Okay.
But and I was asked to enter it again
Yes.
this year, so I wrote another one and sent it in.
You look like you're having a blast.
I love it. I
Yeah.
just love it. I've been very fortunate in my life. I love teaching and I love writing, and it's fun to examine other people's writing and see how they do what they do. I like Lee Child and Elizabeth George and Patricia Cornwell. I've actually studied, I've deconstructed, I guess. I've analyzed what they do and used some of those techniques in my own work.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
How
it's exciting.
Did you experience your Quincy High graduates?
I'm a Quincy High graduate.
Okay.
We moved here when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
And I came back here because this feels like home.
Really?
So yeah, I live in Howes Neck now.
All right.
So, yeah.
Okay. Now, do you find yourself on the quote unquote writing circuit with other authors?
No.
Okay. All right. You're an independent voice.
I'm an independent
Yeah.
voice. I do belong to the Mystery Writers of America, and
Okay.
I know some of those people. I know Hank Felipe Ryan.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so I know some of the people who are members of the Mystery Writers of America.
Okay.
And I have a writing group down in Kingston,
Oh.
and Judith Campbell runs that group. She has 10 books published,
Wow.
and she does fairly well. So she invited me to join her writing group, so
Nice.
that's fun.
Very
Yeah.
good. How's reaction been to your book?
It's gone very well.
Good.
It's gone very well, and I'm learning more about marketing and getting it out there,
Sure.
and getting my name known is what I'm trying to do.
Right.
So people will love me and buy my second and third book. And
Yeah, the business side of it, right?
that's the business side. Of
Yeah.
it.
So, what advice, Florence, would you give to aspiring novelists who are considering traveling the same road that you did?
Make sure you are passionate about it, because it takes hours and hours. And if you're not passionate about it, just walk away.
Okay.
And you have to do it every single day. I get up in the morning, have my cup of coffee, I play a game of cards on the internet for a half hour, and then I write.
Oh, all right.
And my goal is either 3 to 4 hours every day or 500 words that I'm extremely happy with, which can take an hour or two, or it can take 9 hours.
see.
Okay.
Okay. Did you ever want to be an amateur sleuth yourself? Is this, how much of this story is reflective of you?
There are pieces of me
Oh.
and Zoe Stone,
All
of
right.
course.
Okay.
Of course.
All right.
Her life was much more exciting than mine.
Living vicariously through her?
I live vicariously through her.
Okay.
And she has a sister, and their relationship is loving but conflicted.
Okay.
And her sister is a investigative reporter.
Oh.
So she helps Zoe Stone. Zoe Stone is very intelligent and intuitive and very analytical, and she can pull those facts in, and her sister helps her to develop the facts.
Okay.
But the relationship is very conflicted, which
Oh.
is part of the interest in the story.
Okay. Who was the woman on the front cover?
That's the dead woman.
That's the mystery.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the mystery. That's the victim.
We're being joined now by Richard Marinick, who's the author of In for a Pound. Richard, thank you for joining us here.
John, thank you for having me.
Talk a little about In for a Pound, which is your second novel.
Okay, In for a Pound is it's like Boyos. It's a South Boston-based novel. It's a crime thriller. It's noir. It's dark. It's based loosely on a few things that I know that I know are true, basically, and it involves a state police detective lieutenant framed for a crime he doesn't commit. Goes to prison for 3 years, comes out, and he's working in the South Boston bar about 3 months after his release. And a police captain comes in and has a problem that he thinks this man might be able to help him solve. Mm-hmm. So this guy was a great investigator. So after he reluctantly agrees to help out this Boston cop solve this case, and that's how it begins.
Now, In for a Pound has been a much anticipated book because of your first book, which is Boyos,
Right.
which came out with a great review.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about the Boyos and kind of, again, experiences a little bit on your life as well.
Yeah, Boyos was more semi-autobiographical. I mean, it was based on things that I knew, that I experienced personally, things that other people had in that life had they'd experienced and they related to me. Some of the other stuff might have happened. Maybe it did happen. Maybe, if it did happen, this is the way it would go down. These crimes that occurred in Boyos. My publisher wanted me to do a sequel to Boyos, and I said no. Sequels don't rarely as good as the first product, the initial product. And I said I wasn't interested in doing that. I pitched him an idea, and it worked out good. I was able to write about South Boston again. The second novel is based in South Boston, and it worked out very well.
Now, you talk about your life experiences. You've had many different life experiences, many different employments. You've been a Massachusetts State Trooper, among many other jobs. Does that factor into your experiences in writing the book as well?
I know what it's like to Delray McCauley, the protagonist in In for a Pound. He's a convicted felon, former state police officer. He was innocent, unlike myself. I was convicted of a crime that I was a guilty individual, but. Delray was an innocent individual. But I know what he went through when he went into prison, and he reflects back and forth over the course of the novel of the things that he had to deal with as an ex-police officer, especially as an ex-state police officer in the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. It was a hard run, Mm-hmm. So I was able to utilize that information in the book.
On your life experiences, you were born in Boston, but were raised in Quincy, went to North Quincy High School. Talk
Right.
about some of your experiences growing up here in Quincy.
I grew up in Squantum. I lived the first 10, 11 years of my life in Squantum. Squantum was a wonderful place. Sure, it still is. At that time, though, it wasn't an upper-class place the way it is now. It was mostly middle and lower-class people, I think. I loved the place. It was a great experience growing up in Squantum. I loved the 4th of July parades, dressing up in my Little League uniform, marching in the 4th of July. I think that was a big deal, And at the end of the parade, I'll never forget, they gave you a 50-cent piece. You went in back of the Squantum School, and they passed everybody who marched in the parade. They gave them a 50-cent piece, and they gave you I think a hoodsie, some ice cream. I had great memories of Squantum. We moved to Wollaston Hill when I was about 10 or 11, and I stayed in Wollaston Hill till I was about 21.
Now, did you find the second book easier to write than the first one?
The second book was actually harder. The first book I was writing about something I knew intimately, that world. The second book, I did a lot of reading from. I wanted to write a mystery, and I wanted to get out of that gangster genre if I could. And what I did was I read Robert Parker and Dennis Lehane, Elmore Leonard, Raymond Chandler, a bunch of. And the first 200 pages I wrote of the second novel, it came out like it was written by Robert Parker, Dennis Lehane, Raymond Chandler, Elmore Leonard. And I had to recenter myself. My publisher said, "Hey, what's going on here?" He said, "Is he like schizophrenic?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm just trying to find a voice for a mystery." He said, "Just be yourself." I talked to Dennis Lehane. Dennis gave me some good advice. He said, "I was written the second novel in first person." He said, "Go back to the third person." And I did that, and it flowed. It was a little bit of a harder project than the first one, though. But once it was done, I think the third one's going to come easier.
Welcome, Stephanie.
Oh, good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and you're quite the accomplished reporter.
Oh, that's nice of you to say. Thank you.
Author, editor, and it's a pleasure to have you. And you're here to talk a little bit about your book, The Crime of the Century.
The Brinks robbery, yes, yes. It's funny because when I first started researching it, the publisher actually came up with the title, The Crime of the Century. And at first I thought, well, might be overstating it. But the more I researched about this crime, the more I realized that at the time it was considered the crime of the century. It happened January 17th, 1950, when the Brinks headquarters in Boston in the North End was robbed of about $2.5 million total, about 1.5 in cash. It was the biggest armed robbery in the country's history to date, and the first $1 million robbery. And it just caught the imagination of the world, not just in Boston, but all over the world. And people were very intrigued with who were these robbers, how did they pull this off, how did they manage to knock over Brinks, and what were they going to do with the money?
Right.
Which is all the subject of my book.
Great, and there is a little bit of a Quincy connection to this whole
Definitely,
robbery.
yes. Well, some of the robbers, the mastermind, one of the men considered the mastermind, Tony Pino, moved at one point to the Quincy area, and this is probably with some of the money that came from the Brinks robbery. So he lived in this area for a while. In fact, the FBI agent used to go down and visit him because the FBI and the police had their eyes on the men they suspected of the robbery for a very long time before they were able to actually convict them and arrest them. And he used to tell me about going down and sitting in his house in Quincy and trying to talk to him and trying to trip him up, which he never did. And then another one of the robbers, a guy named Jazz Maffey, was the last of the robbers. There were 11 robbers in all. He was the last one to die, and he actually ended his days in Quincy playing golf and being a very good neighbor, from what I hear.
Interesting. I think a lot of the residents will appreciate the connection.
Yes.
Tell me about how you got involved in this topic. What is it about this
Well,
topic?
I, like many people who come to Boston, you hear about the Brinks robbery. You know it was there was a huge robbery here. And you hear the terms, oh, as much money as the Brinks, or you hear people talk about it. There was a movie in 1978, The Brinks Job, starring Peter Falk. There was even a movie before that, in 1954, with Tony Curtis called Six Bridges to Cross about it. But like many people, I didn't really know a lot of the details of the robbery. I knew that it was a huge robbery. I knew that one of the robbers, it was solved because one of the robbers turned in his comrades in the heist, but I didn't know a lot of the details. And I happened to be doing a story for the Boston Herald when I was working there at the time about the opening of a hotel in the old police headquarters, and they had a little exhibit up about the Brinks because they kind of kept some of the police motif there. And I said, I am very interested in that. Let me look into it. And I met the Boston police archivist who told me of material in the archives that had never been gone through by researchers, and a lot of material that could yield a lot of clues about the robbery, like where's the money? Yeah. So I got interested and got a book contract and set to work to research it.
It must have been a lot of fun to put together.
It was like writing it was like writing a mystery novel as well as writing a fact-based book, because there were so many quirks and so many different aspects that I would be researching something and saying, I couldn't make this stuff up.
Absolutely. And this isn't your first book. You have quite a few under your belt. Tell me about those.
My first book was called Boston on Fire, and it was a history of fire and firefighting in Boston. And that led me into another book specifically on the Coconut Grove fire of 1942, which was a horrendous event in Boston history, but very, very significant in its impact on regulations, on treatment of burns, and on manslaughter law. And from there, I went to the Brinks book, and then I went further afield to a book we called East of Boston, about the Boston Harbor Islands, which has been another area of interest of mine for a long time. So I found that Boston and the surrounding areas like Quincy have so much history and so much going on that you can research materials, interview people, and really find out a lot of things that you might not otherwise discover.
We do live in a fascinating section of the country.
Yes, it's a wonderful area.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Talking about
It's
this
good to be
book.
here.
Thank you for joining me for Meet the Author. Be sure to check out our other episodes of this program to explore other authors and their works. For more information about library programs and services, visit the Thomas Crane Public Library's website, thomascranelibrary.org, or call them at 617-376-1316.